my sound on my computer, and that should solve it. Oh, that's a lovely feedback sound. Okay, how's that? Hang on. I think we solved it, right?
I hope so. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
Okay. So, welcome everyone to the Dialect Dive. After all of that, I need a beer.
Yes. Same. Woo!
So, yay. What are you drinking today, Leslie?
I'm having Athena Paradiso. It's from a local brewery here in Athens, Georgia called Creature Comforts.
Oh, cool.
How about
So
you?
it's okay, let's have a look.
Yeah,
I
it's
still got sound issues. Why am I still got sound issues? This is really
Berliner Weiss.
annoying. Okay. You know what? I'm gonna try it the other way around. I'm gonna turn down my phone and I'm gonna turn up the computer and see if that works. Can you still hear me, Leslie?
I can hear you fine. How
Okay,
about you?
perfect. All right. I can hear a little bit of an echo of myself, but that's okay.
I can
All
move
right.
it.
So I'm drinking carbon.
Oh.
And it's an IPA. Oh no, sorry. Carbon is the name of the brewing company. The name of the IPA here is Jedi or JEDI, and they are based in, I don't know where the fuck they're from. Okay, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. That is what Jedi stands for, apparently.
That's cool.
Join our sustainability journey to become Canada's first carbon. So it's from Canada. Canada's first carbon negative brewing company. Yeah, where Canada's a big place though.
I was gonna say
Toronto, right?
No.
Toronto. It says here, Toronto.
Okay. Well, then
Okay.
you're local too. You're drinking local. I'm drinking local.
Exactly. We're drinking local. Always buy local, folks. It's anyway. The first drink on Dialect Dive. This is awesome.
Are you drinking out of a championship glass as I am?
Well, I'm drinking out of a local glass. This is, you can't see it on here, but oh yeah, you can. It's Junction. This glass is from Junction Farmers Market, which I don't think it doesn't exist anymore.
Okay. Well, they made a glass once, so they can.
Yeah. There still is a farmers market in the Junction where I live, but I don't think it is the same one. Well, I guess we should start talking about dialects and accents and stuff. And what about accents and dialects are we talking about today?
Yeah. So why don't we review for the lovely people what how we got to this place this afternoon with our beverages. So there has been some interesting research lately to come out of, well, the researchers involved were out of the University of Georgia, where I am, the Georgia Institute of Technology from Atlanta, and then Brigham Young University. So there were actually a total of 4 researchers. And they have recently published, like in the last month, a study on the change of Southern U.S. English and with regard to particular vowels. So if you have an association of Southern English, you probably have some idea of the vowels that they might be interested in. So words like, and I'll do it with the target accent, the target sound, but like price, that ah sound, whereas many other regional accents would be something like I, price, right? That's one of them. And then there were a couple of others, and I can dig into that later if we want to. But their question of interest is this classical? They didn't use the term classical. I'll come back to why I'm putting that in air quotes in a second. But is that sound going away? And they're comparing speakers from the baby boomer generation to Gen X speakers and then Gen Z speakers. And what they have found is that the Gen X and Gen Z are no longer speaking the way boomers spoke especially with regard to these vowels in particular. And then if you look at it historically, these vowels changed in the years preceding the boomers and then were sort of solidly present and maintained through the boomer generation. But now they're sort of going back. And the changes that are occurring in sounds like press and face and dress are now going back to price, and the changes that are happening in that part of the vowel space are now changing other vowels because they're needing to shift. So Gen Z, for example, is showing a change in a vowel sound like trap. So you're getting some retraction from that front of the vowel space. I'm trying not to be too technical here, but basically changes over generations, and one change spurs another change, right? Which is nothing new if you studied vowel changes in many other parts of the world. And Mark, I know you're going to dive into your own experience and the Birmingham accent. But the two interesting things here are which of the vowels are changing, and then where are we seeing that? So long introduction to what became me seeing this research come out, seeing it picked up by popular outlets, news outlets, magazines, and so forth, and some kind of over-the-top titles in these outlets saying things like, classical Southern is dead with the next generation, right? Which is why I use classical in air quotes. The researchers don't use that term, others are. And of course, I couldn't help but think, well, is anything really dead? I mean, when we have sound changes, are they death or they just change? And so I threw this out to Mark and some of our colleagues, other accent coaches. We are in a little group together. We've just been through some teaching certification experiences together, and put this out to the group. And Mark was the first one to jump on it, and we just started talking ideas and basically what this means. The fact that it's getting popular press is really interesting because, you know, as a linguist and accent coach and teacher, I love it when research gets out there in the mainstream and people start talking about these things because people care about sound, right? It's part of our identity. And so to talk about whether or not something's going away, what does that mean, right? So we just wanted to bring this out into a public space and see if we could kick up some dust around this conversation. But before we go there, Mark, you might want to chime in with your response to me and what it made you think of in your personal experience with language. I'm a Southern English speaker, so this is home to me. My parents are boomers. I speak differently than they do, so I'm living that, but you've lived a different thing.
Yeah, that's true. One thing I should do though is I noticed somebody was saying there we've got a real sound problem, and I think I know how to solve this. I need to because there's a really terrible echo that's coming through on my phone, and I think I need to go and grab a pair of cans to stop the echo happening throughout the whole thing.
Okay.
So before I go into the whole thing about the accent change and so on, I'm just going to go grab that. And would you be able to sort of like go into some of the like those vowel sounds that you're talking about? Like you mentioned the price changing to prass, change and those different those lexical sets where those things were happening. And I'll be back in like half a minute.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so let's dig into the vowels a little bit. So there are particular vowel categories of interest for this study, and if you pay attention to accents at all and you think sort of classic Southern speech, again, classic, right? There are some that you have probably heard, or if you know speakers from this region, you've probably heard them. So the price vowel being one of them. It's a diphthong. It's a combination of two vowel sounds, ah and e. They come together to make the sound I, like in the word price, or ice, or fight, or something like that. For generations, that has been realized by many Southern speakers as something like ah. So it's not a diphthong. it's a monophthong. It gets smoothed to really just one sound. So you end up with a word pronounced like press, okay? Or that's really nice, okay? Something like that. And that's in everyone's association with Southern English. But there are other words in that front vowel space as well. And by front, meaning tongue positions in the front of the mouth to make these vowels. Words like face, okay, which is another diphthong, and it's pronounced in the accent variation under study here, and what's often associated with Southern English because it's been frequently realized this way. Face is something more like face. Okay, so you get a, again, not to be terribly technical, but like a lowering and a retraction, right? And then a word
Right.
like dress would be raised and fronted to something more like dress. Okay, and that's also diphthongized. So basically,
Sorry to interrupt.
go ahead.
I'm just wondering, like, is there's something that I read which was like a reversal
Yes,
between the kit vowel and the fleece vowel. There's like a reversal there.
right.
So, like you mentioned, kit and fleece,
Mhm,
which in standard, so-called standard General American,
mhm.
is the other way around. So, kit and fleece.
Right. So it's two things. It's kit and fleece that sort of reverse and are just the way you pronounce them, but also the ones I just mentioned, face and trap. No, face and what did I say? Dress. Okay. So
Dress.
there are two pairs of vowel sounds that sort of flip and they take the place of each other. They reverse their places. Okay. And that reversal in kit and fleece and face and dress, and then the I dip monophthongization, right, have been associated with and realized in Southern US English. Okay. And again, these things were in place and then maintained through the boomer generation. But now this more recent research is showing that the later generations, beginning with Gen X, so this would be the children of the boomers, and then certainly with Gen Z, who would be the children of the Gen X, right? If I have it right. I get lost in the generations. That they're moving these things back. Okay. I mean, not deliberately, but this is the observation of what they're doing is that I price is now going back to the diphthong that it once was generations ago, price. Okay. And that with changes in these vowels that I just described, it's causing a related change in a different vowel. So that trap vowel is now being retracted because it's been kind of kicked out of its space a little bit.
So you say going back, was it originally like that? I mean, was it, for example, if we just take one of them, like the price vowel in words like price and prize, becoming prass, and in some places also praz. Um,
Right.
did it go from, was the original price and then it became monophthongized to praz and prass, and now it's going back? Is-
You know, if we're talking about the current study, it doesn't really go into depth in terms of when it became what preceding the boomer generation. So you'd have to go back many more generations into they do talk a little bit about the preceding generations, the ones that preceded the boomers as far back as turn of the century and before, but they don't really pinpoint when price came into being. So that's an excellent question. I think we'd have to dig deep back into like 150 years ago, maybe more, to see where these sounds came from, what the etymology of these sounds were, the groups that brought them to this part of the country, and what they did, and then when it became what it was for the boomer generation. But at
Hmm.
some point, there was a transition there.
So does it? It sounds like there's a kind of now correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like there's a kind of accent leveling that's happening, where things are sort of changing, especially in the southern part of the states, where people are starting to conform to that so-called general American accent. Is that right?
Yeah, there's some of that going on. So they did look at factors like, where the speakers lived, if they were in major cities where there might be, you know, a richer mix of people from diverse areas, or if they were from rural areas where they might only be hearing, a certain sound. In the boomer generation, it was certainly true that you had less of that immigration effect, and that some of the speakers in those data sets from those years could have been from areas where there was really one predominant sound around them. So they looked at things like education level, which they boiled down to, I mean, there are various levels of education, but they kind of boiled it down to no college or no college. And they, as sort of as a proxy for socioeconomic status, because some previous studies have looked at that, but they didn't have that information. So they sort of looked at it in terms of education, as a proxy for that. And interesting, they can't attribute effects to any of those factors, really. It's certainly probably true that they're just the influx of new people and new patterns, demographic patterns in Georgia, which is really exploding. I mean, that's a different conversation, but there's got to be some effect. But this particular study with this data set, there were something like 135 speakers that they extracted tokens from. Can't really pin an effect on that, but I think a larger data set and more research would probably bear that
Yeah.
out, right? Yeah. So your term is
So
right, leveling.
yeah, and because as I understand it, accent leveling is something that happens naturally and has happened throughout several periods of history, and whenever you've got lots of people all in one place. So, for example, that's how you ended up with the different accents that you have in the United States. Was, I mean, you didn't. I mean, obviously, all the English speakers that came over speaking English as their first language, the United States, they came from mainly England and some parts of Scotland, Wales, and Ireland as well. But what happened was, like, when you go back far enough to like 150 years, 200 years ago, in any one place, you wouldn't usually, unless it was a settlement like Roanoke or something like that, where everybody was, well, not always from the same place, but maybe from the same region
Mhm.
of England. In most instances, you had, these growing settlements where people were from all over England and had loads of different accents. And that was the case in Australia as well. So when people started settling Australia, or basically taking prisoners out to Australia and setting up prisons there, the people that came there were mainly from the London area, but they were from all over. And then what happened after a generation, even just one generation, they found that the kids were not sounding like their parents, but they were sounding like each other.
Yes.
So even though there was a massive influence from London, because that's where most of the immigrants were from,
Mhm.
there were elements that were not London, and there were parts of the accent that were a bit of this and a bit of that. But the kids from that generation had found their own
Yeah.
thing, and it sounded, and that was the birth of what became the Australian accents. So I think this is something that always happens. It's like a natural phenomenon where each generation is influenced by the things that they hear around them,
Yes.
and it's a natural thing to sound like your peers
Peer,
as opposed to your
that's
parents.
it. Peer influence is shown over and over again to be a stronger influence than what's heard in the home. So that's borne out over and over again. I mean, you cited a great example, and we could think of probably many more on the spot. But certainly, I mean, children want to sound like their peers. Their formative years, those are the influences that are most important to them. And yeah, so they often do come up with their own sound, their own
Mhm.
language, even. Yeah. Hmm.
And another thing I think we were going to mention was accent bias, because as I'm sure at least everybody in the United States is aware, Southern accents are probably, if not the most, it's definitely one of the most, one of the accents that has really suffered a lot from accent bias and associations, negative associations with that range of accents, right?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. I was telling someone this just the other day that maybe it was you. The sort of my accent story and my accent journey is that I was aware at a very young age that this negative association is in place. And, I left my home state and went elsewhere for education and other things and work and other things. And often tried to really keep a lid on any Southern touches in my speech so that I could blend in and not really stand out and have the inevitable questions about my political views and my this and that and the other because of the assumptions people make when they have these ideas about the way you speak. And
Mhm.
someone called me out on it actually a few years ago. Someone who's now a very good friend, another accent coach, commented on my lovely Southern touches in my accent. And I was surprised. And I told her that I usually try to keep that low. And she said, why? It's lovely. Why would you want to hide who you are? So it's very much, and of course that's not exclusive to a Southern accent. I mean, you pick a region, right? And there's some variety that's not the favored variety. It's not the one of status. And
Mhm.
so the speakers of that particular variation, that particular accent or dialect, probably go through some version of the same thing that I just described. Where am I safe to
Yeah.
sound like this? And where do I need to adopt a different sound? And so they move in and out of these sounds, maybe often. Um,
Mhm.
and so, yeah, so this is interesting to me to see that potentially very classic sounds, which are often depicted in production. Usually it's the thing that's pressed my buttons the most. Like, that's not how we actually sound, because they
Uh-huh.
latch on to something and then really it's over the top and
Yeah.
exaggerated. And these are the sounds that are exaggerated to depict Southern English, Southern US English. And so to see
Yeah.
that their speakers might be moving away from that is really interesting to me. It's had me
Yeah.
thinking a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, we and like you hinted at before I went and grabbed my headphones, um, there's a parallel thing that's happening in the UK and has happened in the UK as well. As you mentioned, like changing your accent or, working on altering your own accent because of moving home
Mhm.
from where you grew up in Georgia
Mhm.
down to Texas. And
To Texas
then,
for a bit, but as an adult, I was in DC and Virginia and yeah.
right, right. So several different places. And the same kind of thing happened to me because I grew up in Birmingham, England, not Birmingham, Alabama, uh, and which has again a very distinctive accent. But so when I grew up in Birmingham, I moved from Birmingham when I was an adult. I went to college on the east coast of England in Suffolk, and I lived some time in Essex. I lived in Bristol for a few years on the west coast, and then moved back. I moved to London, and from there moved out to Canada. So throughout that time, I did work on not sounding or trying not to sound too brummy because again there was that burden on you to you know well, first of all, you just get tired of people poking fun, right?
Yes.
And you don't want it to become a whole new conversation where it's like, oh, are you from Birmingham? And then listening to the whole tirade of how awful Birmingham is and how stupid people are supposed to be from there and all those kinds of things. And I think that is something that you accents do pick up these associations. And the one with Birmingham is something that somebody managed to pinpoint. A linguist managed to figure out what it was that caused this hatred for the accent,
Mhm.
because quite often in my generation, Generation X, and also through for millennials and so on, they have, and even boomers, they just assume, I mean, we're talking about people in the UK, they just assume, oh well, the reason that a Birmingham accent is so hated is because it's ugly. You and I know, as people that work in voice linguistics,
Yeah.
dialects, that there's no such thing as um, a subjectively, well, it's a subjective thing, right? There's no such thing as, oh, this defines an ugly accent,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
There's no criteria that defines ugliness or beauty in an accent. This is when really you can say beauty is in the ear of the beholder, right?
Right.
It really does come down to that.
Yes.
So the thing is, it was like, you know, Brummies and people throughout the West Midlands were like, why do people hate the way we sound? What is the problem? What is it that people can't stand hearing about our accents? And somebody managed to figure it out, because what has happened is that it has built up this bad reputation, and then people have been making up their own beliefs of why it is ugly.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you what the theoretical myths are, and then I'll tell you why this whole thing happened.
Okay.
So people say, whenever I've heard anybody who's not from Birmingham or the West Midlands describe how they dislike the Birmingham accent, it usually is described as being monotone,
Oh,
right? Like that people talk like this and it's all on the same level and it never goes up or down. Well,
interesting.
that's just not
True.
true, right? Anybody who listens to somebody from Birmingham can hear that it does go up and
Yeah.
down, right? It has its distinctive intonation
Mhm.
patterns.
Mhm.
Another one is that people are very nasal. Now, it's no more nasal than any other accent, to be honest, and not as nasal as some. So that doesn't bear out. And then there are people that say that it sounds like the person has got a blocked nose, like they've got a cold. Well, if that's the case, then it can't be nasal. So that's completely
Correct.
goes, yeah, that kind of cancels both of those things out. Another one is that it is slow.
Mm.
Some people talk slowly, and I tell you, there I could give examples that I could put up
Mhm.
that show that some Birmingham speakers, a lot of Birmingham speakers, speak very
Mhm.
quickly, to the point where the reason that they will sometimes speak slowly is so that other people can understand what they're saying, right? So that all of these things, and add on to this, there are other things which is like, oh, it's dull, they're boring, they sound sad, they sound miserable, all of these things which
Mhm.
basically just revolve around this whole myth
Mhm.
of this, okay, everybody has to hate the Birmingham accent. The reality is that what happened, and this was David Crystal, the linguist and
Mm.
author, who found this out
Okay.
and delved into the archives to find that just after the war, there was a radio show that it was a comedy. And I can't remember the woman's name now, but nobody in the US would ever have heard of her, so it doesn't matter. And most people that are younger than me will never have heard of her anyway, so it doesn't
I
matter.
was looking at it
So,
just today, actually. I was looking at your breakdown and you did name
oh,
it.
right. So this woman who was from Manchester, this actor from Manchester, she was cast as a character that was supposed to be from Birmingham. And this character happened to be very well, she was played as being very stupid, quite dim-witted.
Beryl Reed.
And was that
Beryl Reed.
Beryl Reed? Yes. So Beryl Reed played her. Beryl Reed was a great actor, but I don't know if she knew that she started
Did
this
a lot of
whole
damage.
hate on for an entire accent of millions of people. Um, so anyway, she played this character and people loved it, thought it was very funny. The accent that she did was a her version of a Birmingham accent,
Mhm.
which wasn't quite right. It was exaggerated again, and yeah, it wasn't how most people sound. And then what happened? So a lot of people around the country heard this on the radio. This was before most people had televisions, right? So everybody tuned into the radio. And what happened was it perpetuated other characters that had obviously heard this show, maybe when they were kids or whatever. And whenever they had a character in a TV show that had to be a little bit dim-witted, a bit slow,
Mhm.
a bit stupid, or a little bit dodgy,
Mhm.
maybe they stole things or something. They would sometimes give them a Birmingham accent.
Interesting.
So what happened for the next several decades was there were no shows set in Birmingham. Well, actually, no, that's not true. There was one, Crossroads, but then hardly anybody had a Birmingham accent in it. That's the weird thing. It was set in Birmingham, but there was one character called Benny who had a Birmingham accent.
Okay.
Benny happened to be like a village idiot.
Well, there you go. So perpetuating the
right?
same myth. Yeah.
Perpetuated the myth,
Mhm.
yeah. And that actor though was one of the very few actors with a Birmingham accent who was actually from Birmingham.
Okay.
Whereas all the others, none of them were from Birmingham, right?
Mhm.
Now, of course, all of this changed in the 2010s. It took that long,
Yeah, a long
right?
time.
To put the Birmingham accent on the map with Peaky Blinders. And even though most of the actors in that, the main actors and supporting actors that that played the main characters, were not from Birmingham. None of them were from Birmingham, right? I think one in the third series, the younger brother,
Mhm.
he was one actor from Birmingham who helped the others with their accents. Out of all of them, they were from different places. They were from Ireland. They were from Surrey. They were from London. None of them were from Birmingham. But the one with the best Birmingham accent was the main guy, Cillian Murphy.
Yeah.
Did his job, did his work, really did his homework by going into Birmingham pubs and listening to people speak.
The best
That's
source
right.
of accent samples. Yeah. Anywhere. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. So that's how that worked out.
It's so
Sad.
interesting that like one bad representation of something can stick in the consciousness of listeners and viewers, and I mean not even way even outside, just in life, not even in performance and production, but just you have an association with someone who had a sound, and then that's stamped in the mind, and then it just gets perpetuated. And I guess we make the choice at some point in life. Do we buy into that perception and make our own changes based on that, or do we choose to reject it and we do our own thing accent wise? And but yeah, this one, just to me, all this started with just seeing this research come out, and it was sort of like looking in the mirror of my accent experience, because those are the generations described in the research are the generations that I
Yeah.
have in my life. My parents being boomers and on down the line. So parents, me, my kids. It's harder to tell with my kids if they have their own sound. I'm sure they do, but I'm with them every day, so it's a little harder to have that distant lens and be objective when I listen to them. But yeah, I mean, just each generation does its own thing, but makes those decisions for a lot of reasons. And
Yeah.
it's
And some of them, yeah, a lot of reasons. And sometimes those reasons are pressure. And so it's kind of a push factor. And sometimes it's just basically a pull factor in terms of the influences that you hear and pick up. Because part of like the way my accent is now is not because I'm trying to sound more Canadian. It's just that I'm surrounded by a lot of Canadians that I work with, mostly they're Canadians, right?
Yeah.
So then my accent has changed because I picked up a lot of features
Mhm.
from them. And it's like it swings between sounding more English, and then like within the
Really,
same minute or the same sentence, it will swing to sounding more, it goes from English to Canadian. And it's not something that, I mean, I can control that
yes.
needle. Like I if I want to, like for example, if I'm, let's say I'm voicing a character, and like for example I've got an independent film that I'm cast in for in the
Mm,
spring. That character is supposed to be from Northern Ontario, so I have to sound Canadian for that.
mhm.
So of course then I'm controlling
Yeah.
it, whereas if I have to sound like somebody from England, then I'm controlling it. But when I'm just being me, there's that kind of variety where my I just go, okay, brain, just
Do
choose one of
yeah,
those. Yeah,
and it will,
and
and it will every time. Yeah, depending on so many things, who you're with, energy level, what you're talking about, how you're feeling. I mean, there's so many things that affect the sounds that come out of your mouth. It's really
mm,
rather remarkable how it all comes together.
yeah, and I think a lot of people don't realize that everybody has this variation that
Yes.
happens
Yeah,
because they speak to different people in different
that's
ways.
right.
That it's never, you're never stuck in this certain way,
That's right.
right? You may have like, okay, a narrower set of phonemes than if you were to go and live in a different country,
Mhm.
but you're still going to have a variation in the ways, the sounds that you use, the intonations that you use, and the register that you use, and all of these different factors that all together make up your
Yeah,
idiolect. So
and most of that knowledge that you have is you weren't aware that you learned it. You know, there's so much
mm,
of this that we acquire without conscious knowledge, and still we can make these changes and call up different flavors and colors and so forth. I have
yeah,
had a blast, but I've got to go do my mom duty and pick up a son at school. So I'm going to leave
oh
it
yeah,
to you, or however you choose to handle it. But thank you for setting this up. And I hope those who
yeah, no
join
worries.
us for our geek out discussion have had a good time. Thanks, everyone. I see a good comment in there from Stephanie about doing something with her flat Wisconsin vowels to make it easier for students.
Oh, yeah. EFL students to understand me. Yeah, awesome.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what I did when I started teaching ESL
Oh, right.
in Canada. Yeah, I started sounding, whenever I go into an ESL class, if I teach ESL, I suddenly I'm more Canadian. It's like, hi everyone, my name is Mark. And then like if I hear a recording of it, it's like,
Who's
what are you
that?
doing? And there's a paper on that. I read a paper on that very thing as well.
Send me
So
that paper.
there's all kinds
I'd
of
love to
stuff.
read that.
Yeah, I have to send it your way.
Thanks.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much in joining me for this. We'll have to do it again for sure.
Awesome.
And
Colleagues will be joining on other fun topics. So good stuff to.
cool. Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Thank you. Bye to you and bye to everybody watching.
Bye bye.